So, the history of British popular music or British rock music, that's what we're exploring here. I have Ben Finlay, and I hope you appreciate that I haven't called this Dr. Finlay's case, rock case book, which I nearly did. May do, you know, but I don't think it would explain what's going on. This is very exciting because we are talking our way through British popular music history, and we started around about 1946. We're now to the 1980s, and what was very interesting, and we both had a bit of a revelation, is culturally there's not much going on in the 1970s. What we don't have is the generation gap that's exiting that period. They don't exit. Everybody hangs on, and from this moment on, rather than it being like this in terms of generation gaps, it just starts to do this, and everyone joins the party. Punk is not the Great Revolution. It is just the sort of what you'd expect from the little brothers and sisters to do. But by the time we get to the 1980s, it all joins back up. But here you are now almost biting at the bit to try and explain culturally what is going on in the 1980s. It's like the 70s, there's hardly anything we can pinpoint. The 1980s, where do we start? Thatcher coming in. That age where everyone hated her, the Falklands War, when suddenly everyone loved her because she went and beat the Argentinians up. Then she beats the miners up. Right, the first part of the 80s, incredibly political, echoed in the bite, I think, that the pop music has, which has learnt from the drawing and the progressive rock and all these things. I always feel that jazz rock fusion is drawn in the 1980s and turns into Michael Jackson and Prince and the pop music. Here, we take progressive rock, we don't throw it out, but we draw it in. And suddenly our pop music has the bite, and it has something back which progressive rock had gone from, you know, the anarchy of Syd Barrett and Pink Floyd to basically John Williams' Sky over that decade. And that audience had gone with it. And I love Sky. You know, and that almost goes into things like Cats and Starlight Express. You've got that line which follows through. But the early 80s, some of the best pop music ever made. It's like what we did in the realms of rock, we do in pop. And there's so much bite there and so much excitement. And this music goes around the world again. We become world leaders again. I think after Live Aid, something turns on and you get this yuppie period of awful music, which is then overturned by another mini revolution in music that happens in the 90s, a revolution that I think is bigger than the punk 76 revolution. So, Ben, your job is to try and go all through all the multitude of cultural shifts and change that are happening in the wider world behind all this music.
Yeah, I think with the 79 with Thatcher coming in, and as you said, she's very unpopular in her first tenure up until the Falklands War. Really, I mean, there is a backlash politically against that, and also as punk goes by, there's something else happening within our music. I mean, you get the new romantic scene, don't you? Really, that draws on Bowie and those sort of things, and other American influences as well. I mean, but the thing that always stands out to me is by the middle of the decade, you've obviously got the Band Aid and then the Live Aid concerts. So as in terms of those older performers that we talked about that are still perhaps in their hitting 40 around that time, this is great for their careers. It enforces a sort of liberal view of sort of caring as well. This sort of feeling that, you know, the Thatcher Reagan thing is a sort of harsh, cruel, you know, sort of regime, and that you know that rock stars are going to save the world, and there's a series of concerts around that time as well, isn't there?
So what's interesting is when we started this off, and you've got the Attlee government in the latter half of the 1940s, that are left wing, and that's chiming with a new sort of utopian idea of the future, which actually works, and affluence kicks in, and you have that walk from the late 40s to the 1960s, and then it crashes. What you have in the 80s is now the pop stars and the rock stars on the whole. You've got the sort of dregs of the progressive rock era, and they seem Thatcherite, don't they? If ELP are reforming, they seem like a Thatcherite band.
Yeah.
But anybody who's cool, and it can be of any age, but anybody who's cool is promoting left-wing ideas against the government. Now you've got a proper.
It's amazing in the time when Richard Hogarth wrote Uses of Literacy and was against the rock and roll generation, that would say, what was that, 57, 25, less than 30 years later, that these people, this is what the left has become now. I mean, sitting outside of the Live Aid thing, that I think people like Weller did sing on that. You had the Red Wedge stuff.
Yeah.
And you had people like the Communards and all of that sort of stuff that were particularly anti-Thatcher and anti what was happening to the miners and that. In the established rock stars, you get something else, like Live Aid. Though again, going back to something like Wellers, the Style Council performance, they did a track called The Internationalists, which was their ode to international socialism, as it were. So it's there. It's sort of implicit in that as well, but it's funny that people would sort of look back on the people like the Dire Straits and stuff like that as a Tory sort of thing. They weren't particularly. Someone like Martin Knopfler comes from quite a socialist background, and he was a teacher.
This is the fascinating thing that I think nobody ever talks about. So for me, I'm 12 in 1980, and I discovered music in 1980, right? And punk's not going to do it. Punk wasn't my thing. It was Iron Maiden, Angel Witch, and it's particularly Motorhead. And Motorhead seemed to traverse. They had this thing that went back to the sort of almost like the glam bands that we had when I was a little kid. So they got a little bit of Gary Glitter, who was my favourite musician in the early 70s, I hate to say. Motorhead come out in 1980, Ace of Spades. It goes to number one. They do that, No Sleep Till Hammersmith. That live album comes out. The live album comes to number one. 1982, I'm old enough to go with my uncle to see a band for the first time. I choose Motorhead. I go to the Birmingham Odeon in April 1982. They're on the Iron Fist tour. Right, Tanker supporting. I know when I say this, people will be putting in the comments, yeah, I was there too. Now, what struck me, that was the day we went to war with Argentina. And all the sort of bikers that were there that were scaring the pants off me, because I've never seen anything like this, a lot of them were walking around with t-shirts that said fuck Argentina, and I was shocked that they had those on. There was suddenly again a very strange patriotism kicks in, a respect for Maggie Thatcher for standing up to the Argentinians, but still a mistrust of the establishment.
So this is an interesting one, but just while I remember it on Argentina. So the older left at the time. So even when Michael Foot was running the Conservative government, what were anti the Argentines invading the Falklands. Yeah. You don't get pushed around by a load of, Argentinian fascist black shirts. It just doesn't happen. And there's a lot of people of that older generation. So it shows you how much the left has shifted. The 60s left, the countercultural stuff, manifests most of all, if we're talking about those sort of bands, against the Falklands War with the Final Cut. Roger Waters, really, really anti-Thatcher, Argentine, the anti-Falklands War album, with stuff like on there, the tracks have called like the post-war dream, whatever happened to the post-war dream. All of this stuff is Waters writ large is really anti. So anything since since the Second World War, any sort of wars, any sort of intervention, everything is bad. That's it, blanket. And so and that's something that carries on, and we know that theme through to Iraq. All of that stuff later on. There isn't any argument about it as well. So it's a generational, it's in terms of politics, there's a generational thing that going on that some older lefties would have agreed with Thatcher, maybe not with the same zeal that she used with the task force and the way that with the Belgrano being sunk outside the exclusion zone and all of that sort of stuff. But this is British sovereign land, and you don't have this taken
You don't
over.
mess with us, basically. That I can
You
remember
don't
that
mess
was the
with us.
feeling of it.
And that's an far more old working class point of view. And that's what Thatcher did as well, is that she'd leveled that class system and took a lot of the working class with her as well into her world, and took them from the Labour Party. So what is left of, as it were, good pun up for the Labour Party, is culture, is the 60s gang. Is that, and then the beginning of Blairism later on, and that it draws from these cultural values that we see in the 1960s so much.
I think one of the things that drives the British music scene then is we suddenly do have that, in terms of music does tend to represent the opposite of what the government is representing. So the 60s, they're all protesting and they don't like Johnson, they don't want to go to Vietnam, and you get all that sort of country around the fish at Woodstock. We don't have that. Ours is all fun and, it's all weird and let's just be surreal and, say I'm the Eggman. It's all that type of thing. By the time you get to the early 80s, it's a strange punning mix where the leftists are much more identity based.
Yes.
Quite a joyous way. So they are saying you should be supporting gay people. People shouldn't be tied down by gender stereotypes and all these types of things are going on. That's in the pop music at the time.
Mm-hmm.
You feel that there's a leftism in the working class, say the ska movement with bands like the Specials and Selector, but not so much with Madness. But you feel like within the new wave of British heavy metal there is more support of Thatcher. Within the pop music, that where Roger Waters is bemoaning all of that as a multimillionaire, Duran Duran is celebrating being affluent, as our Wham. And so it's a very strange period, but there's bite. I wonder whether this is the beginning of the sort of the toxic culture war that's going on now. Culturally is birthed in the 1980s, and it's a strange hysterical conservatism against a strange new leftist identity politics, and it's exciting in the 1980s. It plays out in a certain way.
Exciting, and also I would probably add at the beginning of this stuff, and necessary as well. These things were major issues at the time in a way that we still state them extremely large now, the identitarians, but they may be, whatever the backlash to is, not be quite as bad as they were back then, and it certainly weren't as bad, say, as they were in the early 1970s. So
so this, for me, the great two events culturally in terms of British popular music would be the arrival of the CD, which consolidates all those old albums again. We're all going to buy them again. Then we're going to buy them again. And that really creates... you've gone
from vinyl to tape.
Yeah, vinyl to tape. So suddenly you have a multiplicity of listening. Our stereo at this point in the house has really grown. We've got separates. The music center's gone. We've got separates, and we've got great big speakers. And then you get buying an album that you had on vinyl, but when you hit it on CD, it's blowing you away because the bass response, the treble response, and everyone's buying.
Everyone's doing it. When I was a kid, when my parents had a friend who was he was a big sort of 60s lefty as it was, and the rest of it. Phoned up one day and said, "Oh, can you send Ben round? Because I don't know how to work it. I just bought this great big stereo separate system, and I want to check out Pink Floyd's Final Cut through it." And I remember thinking at that age, like, wow, that's. Oh, and the credit cards you got all of this stuff that you can borrow and money, and it's all going around.
It's all, for me, it's all not 1984, 85.
Yes.
And for my birthday, I go up to Birmingham to a place called Rich's Sounds, which had really cheap separate stuff, but really high quality. And my dad got me an amp. He gets me a CD player and two great big speakers, right? And that is set up in the living room, but it's my stereo because now I'm in full music mode and I've got a big vinyl collection, and I move over to CDs. Then before I bought a tape to tape, so I can not only record other people's CDs, and if you've got a good quality cassette tape and a CD, what you get is better than the vinyl. It seemed at the time. So now you could copy stuff.
Which I used to do all the time.
Yeah.
You could do that. You make your own mixtapes and stuff.
Yeah, or to get yourself a C90, and you can get 2 albums on there. So you go out to your mate. So I got a C90. Can I borrow 2 of your records? 2 CDs.
And because as well, music is. And I just remembered this all the way along. Music is still so important.
It's massively important, yeah. So
before identity takes over now, as is in terms of real identity. Your identity is through your music. So if you're an old fart, but I mean, I used to get the Mickey taken out of me at school because I actually like old fart boober music.
Well, to me, I did as well.
I cut off around 1977. Yeah. I didn't want to know after seconds out. It was like, that's it.
Well, but the thing is that I believe in my school, I was listening to heavy metal, then I moved on to prog, and then I was listening to jazz and jazz rock. But there was a contingent there, and in 1983 Marillion emerged, and that neo-prog thing happens, and the Marillion become huge. And so this idea that everyone's sitting there, with a flock of seagulls haircut, listed, it wasn't like that. So in my school there were pockets of people like this, and across the whole country there must have been a lot of us. And
down here it was the Pogues. They all loved the Pogues, and I was a complete non-entity because I'd liked Eric Clapton or something, whatever,
But don't you feel as the 80s progressed, it like collapsed, and suddenly, because for me, the Cult came out, they were an indie band, all the indie lot liked them, and then suddenly they bring that electric album out and they sound like AC/DC, and then suddenly you get that contingent going, well, are AC/DC good? I thought they were like Status Quo.
Yeah, which one are they? Yeah.
Well, I don't know now. And you see the rehabilitation of those 70s bands, certain ones, Zeppelin without a doubt. Zeppelin in the 1980s was so unfashionable.
Really unfashionable. Hendrix, really unfashionable. Cream, all of those bands, really not until 88, 89, where you start getting the 20-year anniversaries of everything.
Yeah,
20
that's
years
right.
of Woodstock, 20 years. The first one, probably 87, was broadcast to the day 20 years after Sgt. Pepper was released.
I remember it. And it was like all over the television. So it
was huge, and it was a major difference to people of my age as well, that this lives again. This is 20 years later.
It's hard to get an angle on all the stuff, because that thing that we noticed in the 70s, where the music industry sort of does that, and then the 1980s is full of it, because also people listen to American albums. You got Prince and Michael Jackson coming over. You're getting bands like Five Star coming out, copying the Jacksons, a very British version of that. And I'm thinking of we could talk about all the big stuff. Now, the big stuff is one of those post-punk bands, the Boomtown Rats. They have that very the government's not going to do anything about this. That sort of against the government, new leftist identity based. Look what we've done to the people in Africa. And Bob Geldof says we've got to do something about this. And this grows into the biggest event in the whole of rock and pop music history. And I think it has the effect of drawing the line in terms of rock and roll, where up until then they're all kids making music. Yes. It's all the youth music, and the Rolling Stones are 40 now, they're nearly 40. Yeah. But that, and then suddenly they're all righteous, and all these, and also the gig shows you that all the proper bands like Queen, were the ones who could actually play, or U2.
Well, there's that in there as well. I mean, Dire Straits, whatever. I mean, they could play, and even the Quo opening it up, they could play. Yeah, all of this stuff. And then the 80s ones, some of them, but maybe not everyone. It changes. Queen come out and they do their thing. It's
the moment of light. I went and watched the Queen show again. The moments where Queen completely rehabilitate themselves and lay the groundwork for them eclipsing now any other big great rock band. Queen have eclipsed Led Zeppelin, they've eclipsed Deep Purple, Hendrix. There is no classic era rock band. And I have to be honest, as I've got older, I'm starting to think, because they were the best. Queen actually were the best of those bands. I hate to say it, but they...
No, I'm not a fan either, but because you can't knock that. I can't think of anyone of the British side of it at all that was any better. I I recorded it off the telly. My dad went down to Wharfs and he said, "There's only 6 hours. There's only two VHS recordables left. We got 6 hours. You're going to have to do it in bits. I'll tell you what to record."
Yeah, yeah.
So great Blicks of the Afternoon, Elvis Costello, and all that.
Yeah.
We just didn't record. No way.
Yeah.
Dire Straits, U2, Queen. That's all on there, on those videos.
Yeah. It's really, I mean, because this talk has gone from a very intellectual talk where you're utilising all your cultural knowledge and knowledge of British history, and you know what's going on, and I'm utilising my knowledge of trad jazz and the British jazz scene. Now we're into the 80s. We're into first-hand experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah,
and I remember watching it. I go around to my mate's house. We're playing pool in his garage, and the TV's running. I was 17. It was the first time I'd gone out. We went to the pub and bought some cans, and I was drinking beer with my mates. And my mum and I, all right, having a couple of cans. Yes, I suppose so. So I'm having. This is the beginning of that adult, rock and roll period, and we were watching Live Aid. And I remember we were taping it all at home, but on the night, or sort of on the early evening when Queen came out, and it wasn't like Bohemian Rhapsody or any of that. It was Radio Gaga, because they go, "Oh, we need," and the whole thing is going like that, and you can see they just dominate. It's really basically my point I'm making is that if you look at everything that we love in the 1970s, all at Pink Floyd, yes, Genesis, Jethro Tull, Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, whatever it is, ZZ Top, Van Halen, whatever you want to talk about, and all the stuff we love here. If you go back and get a live recording from 1974 of Queen, they beat them all.
Yeah, because it is a musical populism, isn't it, as well? This is so different from sitting on a beanbag smoking a joint and listening to
But they do all that. You go, if you put Ogre Battle on, they're doing all that. But they can also consolidate that. They can deliver Tales from the Top of the Graphic Oceans, but they'll deliver it in a pop song, which is better. Because Bohemian Rhapsody, I'm saying this to someone the other day, the middle section is more way out than any progressive album you want to get. Nobody went that far out.
With the choral bit, yeah.
Yes, Pink Floyd, nobody went that far out. I've really realised, I've been going back to these mid-70s Queen live recordings. Freddie Mercury's vocals are perfect. He's the greatest frontman of all time. Brian May sounds like a heavy metal guitarist, not a rock guitarist. He's fluid, he's fast. And
he don't put a foot wrong, does he?
Yeah.
Either. It's bang on.
The vocals that are coming astonishing. Roger Taylor's drums are absolutely iconic and perfect. The music's hard, he's negotiating, but all the way through it, he's singing higher than Freddie Mercury.
Yeah, he's got that high harmony.
It's unbelievable. And I think, I mean, there's too much to discuss. I think. You mentioned in Live Aid as you did, and my consider. I've done whole videos on Live Aid. And they've done hundreds of 50,000 views, and I've said it really marks the end of it's the beginning of the end. But one thing I'm going to add here is I think Queen almost lay the groundworks for legacy rock music.
Yeah.
In that performance, that it changes popular music, because now all bets are off. There is no new or old. As digital technologies come in, as streaming comes in, you then find that Queen are the biggest band in the world, and it never goes away. And they are. Yeah,
I mean, they're around for 20 years roughly with Freddie Mercury, and they've lasted another 35 after it. But basically off of the back of that. I mean, they've not even tried to record any new material, I don't think, since
I think that this really explains to you what in 1985 a stifling of rock and pop music happens, and Queen represents it, right? And I think then in the UK, the promise of Thatcher, which was hurting people throughout the early 80s, kicks in, and there is real affluence.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's again just personal anecdote, but I remember, and we didn't have a lot, but I remember there was money. Things had changed. You get this And also, what happens as well with after Queen and Live Aid, that is the beginnings of the state. That happened before the real big stadium tours, with where it sounds and looks good as well. I mean, Genesis. I saw the Floyd when I was 14 in 1988. You know,
what was that like seeing it at that age? In that, I mean,
well, I was saying to someone the other day, a real bummer for going to school when we came back in September, because there was no go. You know, it was mind blowing, and they would look back on it now, and they were playing, you know, stuff from Momentary Lapse of Reason, which you probably knew was a bit lumpy at the time. But when you're 14, there's a lot of that you can forgive, and then they will do all the classic stuff in the second half. Yeah, just unbelievable, really. And then and it launches that, and then the Stones reform off of the back of that in the late 80s, and it's all, and they'd done stadium tours and probably pioneered them, but they were back in that world as well, weren't they? And everything, it's sort of become that, and so nothing's really changing or shifting much anymore in that. It just becomes a commodification of it, but all of those big bands do so well. U2 after that time, all of those people. They do. Clapton played in the States. He does incredibly well, and it really revives his fortunes from, you know, the year before. The year before Live Aid, he was playing down here at like the Pool Arts Centre. Like,
I remember.
Yeah, you know. Following that, it's the Albert Hall and residencies, and then he's Journeyman, and then he can do the blues in the 90s and does what he wants. It springboards people like that to be able to go.
I can remember he had an album out around about 83, 84, and it was called something like Coffee and Cigarettes or something.
Money and Cigarettes, yeah.
Yeah, and this album came out, it was mentioned on Radio 2 late at night, and I listened to it because I was a bit of a Clapton fan. Yeah. And you really knew he was on his last legs, and this had a vague interest for old people who were into Clapton.
Still drinking, and no.
And it was just such and the title of the album, and then suddenly he joins up with Phil Collins, gets a white suit, stops playing the bloody guitar. There's hardly any guitar in those albums, and he becomes
August and all of that, yeah.
And this is the thing, Clapton in the 1980s, he's 40 years old. He becomes a pop star. Lionel Richie becomes a pop star. Phil Collins becomes a pop star. And the thing is, we're supposed to, on this video, be talking about Joy Division, New Order, the Manchester, you know, that Factory Records, the Smiths, the Cure.
I don't know a lot about. I don't know enough really about that. I mean, I know it, obviously.
I can do that right now, but I actually think that is the last vestiges of the establishment narrative going, oh, this is where it's important.
But do you know, also with those bands, what would also put me off of that was the people around it at the time. It wasn't their fault, but they'd been sold an attitude, the fans, the people I knew at school. And it was so holier than now. And it continues to this day. It's like year zero, 77. Sorry out there, everyone that I know that likes it, but it is there. And I felt, whether it was real or not, in my sensitive little world, really ganged up because I wasn't a boomer, but I just liked that, like you, like music.
I was old enough to accommodate it. I sort of went along with it. I bought Head on the Door by The Cure because I really liked the album. So I
tried The Cure, but
I'd go around and put that on. And they all loved The Clash, which is why I hate The Clash. I remember Big Audio Dynamite coming out and Cut the Crap, and I remember my mates didn't like Cut the Crap, but they liked Big Audio Dynamite. I'd go around to their houses, you know, I was in the sixth form, they'd go and listen to Big Audio Dynamite, or they'd put Transformer by Lou Reed, and I just knew that they were full of shit. I knew that it was just like, I've realised that there was this fracturing amongst the generations, and everybody's extending that little thing. You didn't have to just walk away from it, you know, like you would have done in 1962 if you'd have bought Louie Louie or the Kinks. And then 2 years later, you've got a job and you grow up, you don't do this anymore, you know. That's no longer going on, and it's fractured. And the truth is throughout this narrative, this is the truth, is that the incredible achievement of turning pop music into rock music in the 1960s, that never goes away.
Never.
Till this day, in reality, the most important music is that music and what came out of that. It is your Eric Claptons, it is your Pink Floyds. And so when the 80s come along, they are all able to establish themselves even greater. So the biggest gig in 1987 was the Momentary Lapse of Reason tour. One of the biggest artists was either Eric Clapton or Phil Collins. That is the reality. That's the reality. And I think it's really shown by Sting.
Huge.
The Police come out. They're the biggest band in the world. They're all over the place, punk and reggae. They almost consolidate all the excitements of the early 80s. Then Sting leaves. He pulls in basically Weather Report, Miles Davis's band, and he starts making albums that are incredibly accessible. They sell in the millions.
He's everywhere. He's
everywhere. But the musical depth is there. And the narrative can't deal with it. It just doesn't.
That's what I think. And I remember seeing the Floyd in '89 as well. And there was a review in the Guardian, and they didn't know what to do. That they were playing. They were playing London Docklands Arena as it was then, and we saw them on a Sunday afternoon because they had to fit a matinee in. Yeah. And I think Gilmour would have been rather watching the tennis because I think it was the Wimbledon finals, and he was. Anyone know the final, the score of Wimbledon? Well, we don't, Dave, because we're here, aren't we? Watching
we spent a load of money and we're watching you,
going woo. But and they didn't know how to deal with it. And it's like Michael Jackson. How many nights did he play at Wembley Stadium in the late 80s? The mainstream narrative, they didn't know how to deal with this stuff.
I think the truth is that that era of pop music, which is what rock music is, the depth, the excitement, the virtuosity, all that stuff that we're celebrating that is in rock music. I don't listen to Bach or Mozart, right? I listen to rock music still today. The most profound music for me would be like Van Halen's first album or Highway to Hell by AC/DC or I Love Supreme by John Coltrane. They're all the same to me. But the real narrative is that the wonderment that the Apollo era progressive rock bands of the late 60s, what they laid down never went away. The truth is that the narrative is wrong. But the thing is that it's all swilling about. By the end of the 1980s, pop music is Kylie Minogue, and rock music is what do you want it to be? Slayer or Motley Crue, But around about 1990, 91, I believe there is the last great revolution, which is the putting to bed of this. And once it was put to bed, it was over. And I believe it's now been over for 30 years.
Yeah. I think you're right.
Because I can remember in 91, 92, I was young, but old enough to have a bunch of mates. Some of them had played in the 60s, some of them are my age. Everyone was saying in 1992, rock's dead. Very much like everyone in the 70s was saying jazz is dead. And that's the
people used to shout at each other. Yeah.
Early 70s, jazz is dead, or just smells funny. Rock, we all said rock was dead, and we were right. And so now we move on to what I'm going to class as the death of rock music, is the final one. And we're going to be looking at what I think were quite revolutionary things going on in the United Kingdom at that point. Really exciting stuff, but I'm going to argue something to you, and hopefully you're going to be able to fill in the sort of cultural gaps for me and see where we go. So that will be the last of this series. So I hope you enjoy it, and the last one tomorrow. And if you'd like it, put a like on it, and we'll bring Ben back, because the next one to do is America. We need to. That's going to be huge. To do that sort of 60 years trajectory in American music is going to be huge. But anyway, let's move on to the last gasp of proper rock and roll.